Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight on this Tuesday, June 18th.
I don't think it's wrong or I wouldn't do it.
A leading state legislator defends his personal stake in Illinois' gambling industry.
What they've done before is go behind closed doors and carve up the spoils of the city.
Is there a better way to draw Chicago's ward map? Two aldermen weigh in. The latest on the trial of a man accused of brutally killing Chinese scholar Yin-Yang Zhang. The murder of Laquan McDonald and ensuing public outrage in Chicago are the focus of a new documentary on Showtime.
We are very seldom seen.
A new community garden aims to increase visibility of Chicago's American Indians. As Illinois readies a massive gaming expansion across every corner of the state, we'll examine the likely impact on gambling addicts.
Books are an opening to an intellectual and magical world.
And a cancer diagnosis leads a man to donate 400 rare and valuable books to the University of Chicago. All that and more next on Chicago Tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Paris Schutz. Here's what's making news in Chicago tonight. A former alderman pleads not guilty to insurance fraud in Cook County Court. Proco Joe Moreno denied charges that he loaned his car to a friend and then filed that false police report saying it was stolen. Moreno also faces a count each of disorderly conduct, obstructing justice, and filing a false police report. Moreno lost his seat to current First Ward Alderman Daniel Espada. The Chicago White Sox want to make attending ball games a little safer for fans in the stands. The team announced today it would extend the protective netting between the field and fans all the way to the foul poles. Now, right now, they extend to the ends of the dugout. It would be the first stadium in Major League Baseball to cover that much of the grandstand. All this comes after a few recent incidents where foul balls struck fans and caused them to be taken to the hospital. The team says exact details and timing will be announced at a later date. Well, we have our first glimpses of the Lincoln Park Zoo's new baby rhino. The 1-month-old eastern black rhinoceros briefly showed his little face on Wednesday, although not before some coaxing by his handlers. Baby Rhino, that's what we're going to call him right now because he's yet to be named, came out of the shadows into the public for a brief few moments, and then he went right back in. His very protective mama rhino, named Kapuki, was looking on for the whole thing. Lincoln Park Zoo officials say the rhino's birth is a really big deal because the species is critically endangered. As for the weather, how about all of that blue sky up there today? You might be missing it tomorrow. Low tonight around 63, mostly cloudy, and then a slight chance of showers in the afternoon with a high around 70. I almost forgot what the sky looked like. The only state legislative leader who hails from outside the Chicago area is Illinois Senate Republican leader Bill Brady. He was here today for a speech at the City Club. Our Amanda Vinicky was there too and is here with some more, including what's believed to be Brady's first public comments after revelations that he has a stake in Chicago's booming gambling industry. Amanda, what did he have to say?
Now, Paris, we've talked about the massive gambling expansion that's set to come to Illinois. It's more than just new casinos in Chicago, Waukegan, and the south suburbs. Establishments that offer video poker will be able to add new machines, and those who play them can increase their video poker bets. That's something that will ostensibly fatten the wallet of certain lawmakers who have personal financial stakes in the industry, including Senate Republican leader Bill Brady of Bloomington.
I don't think it's wrong or I wouldn't do it.
A ProPublica WBEZ investigation revealed that Brady has what he calls a business interest in Midwest Electronics Gaming, a video gaming company making millions mostly in central Illinois. Here's how Brady describes his venture.
I'm a business person. I've been in various businesses, and from my real estate companies to home building business, other businesses, like all other members of the General Assembly. This just is another business interest I have that deals in the area of video poker entertainment facilities throughout the state.
Brady would not say how much money he's made from his role as a video poker sales agent.
Do you think just as I won't tell you how much money I make from real estate commissions and other businesses I've invested in.
So, Amanda, Bill Brady pretty adamantly says he hasn't done anything wrong. Is that the general consensus, that he really hasn't done anything wrong?
There's no talk of anything illegal, certainly. Brady also says that he ran this by Senate Republicans' ethics attorney, and Brady says he didn't have to, but upon the lawyer's advice, he abstained from voting on the gambling expansion bill. Still, the connection has added fodder to the notion that government officials can and do make a private buck based on their public jobs. Like other state officials, Brady did fill out the required statement of economic interest form. That form, though, is notoriously vague. It's difficult to tell whether an official may actually have a conflict of interest or not. Case in point, there is no mention of Midwest gaming in Brady's forms, only Brady Ventures. ProPublica and WBEZ reporters found that payments to Brady from Midwest go through Brady Ventures. That's a venture that the senator owns with his wife. I asked Brady whether these forms should be updated so links are more apparent.
Evaluating things like that on a constant basis is a positive thing. In my case, if I run across a situation that I think, which seldom happens, I talk to my ethics officer as I've followed what my ethics officer has told me to do. So I am not aware of any changes that need to be made at this point in time.
Amanda, we mentioned at the top that Republican leader Bill Brady is the only leader in the House and the Senate not from the Chicago area. He was up here at the City Club. What do you have to say about everything that went down in Springfield? Budget, gambling, marijuana, etc.
Yeah, right. All right. So Brady reminded the City Club audience that Republicans didn't actually have much leverage going into this legislative session because the GOP lost big last November.
We were in the super minority and we had some decisions to make. And I'll confess to you that there were people in our own party in this state who thought that Leader Durkin and myself and the caucuses that we proudly represent should have taken a fire and brimstone approach. Maybe we should have just said, oh, hell with you Democrats, we're going to fight everything.
By going instead a different route, Brady says by choosing to cooperate, Republicans were able to moderate some of Democrats' more progressive agenda. Going forward, though, he says it is going to be imperative that Illinois vote down, with Republicans' help, Governor J.B. Pritzker's constitutional amendment to allow a graduated income tax. Brady also calling for movement on reducing the state's pension obligations. Now, voters will get a chance a year from November to vote on that constitutional amendment. That, of course, is when President Donald Trump declaring his re-election bid today will presumably be on the ballot in Illinois. Brady says if Democrats do try to impeach President Trump, that can help Republican candidates here, particularly in distinguishing themselves. He also says he expects Trump to do better this time around in Illinois. He says that's in part to a booming economy nationally and also the pro-business agenda that Trump has pursued in D.C.
Amanda, thank you very much. And up next, the debate over redrawing Chicago's ward map. Do you know what Chicago ward you live in? If not, you might be forgiven. Let's take a look at Chicago's 50 ward maps, or map of 50 wards. Look at it. It's kind of hard to make sense of it. Critics say they're heavily gerrymandered, with some wards having no natural neighborhood or geographic boundary. The map gets redrawn every 10 years after the census, usually in back rooms where political deals are made. But Mayor Lori Lightfoot wants to change all that. In an interview with WTTW last week, Lightfoot called for an independent commission to do the job instead of politicians.
For example, you look at either Back of the Yards or Inglewood. Those two communities are carved up multiple ways, and I hear from community members in both neighborhoods, they don't know who to go to get representation because so many different aldermen have a piece of their neighborhood. We've got to have a map that fairly represents neighborhood and community interests and not just the interest of the local elected official.
Joining us with their reactions to Lightfoot's proposal are Alderman Jason Irvin of the 28th Ward. He's chair of the City Council's Black Caucus, and Alderman Scott Wagisback of the 32nd Ward, chair of the Finance Committee. Welcome both of you back to Chicago tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Alderman Irvin, is it fair to say Chicago's map is gerrymandered?
No, Chicago's map is not gerrymandered. I believe that Chicago's map represents the communities of the city of Chicago, as well as the issues under the Voting Rights Act. Many of the changes that people may perceive to be a little odd have been based in many cases by the Voting Rights Act, where we're trying to draw wards that represent African Americans and Latinos pursuant to the act.
You're saying that the wards were drawn, and they were drawn in 2011, the last time they were drawn, to make sure there was equal representation. Alderman Wagisback, do you believe that these maps are gerrymandered?
Well, I would argue that they're not fully gerrymandered, but there is some there. If you look at the 1st Ward, 2nd Ward, 30th Ward, they look like horseshoes or snakes that run through the city. And I don't think there's a person in any one of those wards who doesn't realize that that's a problem for city services, and it's probably a problem for the Federal Rights Voting Act as well.
Alderman Irvin, what about that? I mean, Mayor Lightfoot brought up the fact that in some neighborhoods you might have 6 different aldermen representing that neighborhood area, and that causes confusion.
I mean, it may cause confusion. Like, for example, I represent a portion of Austin. Austin is one of the largest communities in the city, and there, I believe, are 4 aldermen that represent portions of Austin. Again, that may happen. However, again, we're trying to achieve something in a sense that's greater, because we must make sure that we protect the voting rights not only of African Americans and Latinos, but also language minorities and other individuals in our city.
Alderman Wagisback, a little more on how this map affects everyday citizens.
Well, I think if you look at Chinatown, there's an example where for decades Chinese Americans have been disenfranchised, and they've been asking, at least since I've been alderman, and I think in the last census from 2010, from 2000, can we have a ward that, or at least 2 wards representing us instead of 4 or 5? And then if you look at some of the neighborhoods in the 1st and 2nd, in the 30th Ward, you do have some populations there that do get good representation, but some of those populations have moved further northwest. And I think, you know, as times change, as people move out of certain areas, we need to be considerate of the fact that we have to follow the rules of the Federal Rights Voting Act, which is we have to have, we can't have racial gerrymandering. We have to have equal or roughly equal amounts of population. We can't dilute minority populations, and we have to have areas that are or wards that are compact and contiguous. You can argue that some of these are not set up that way.
Alderman Irvin, I remember when the ward maps were being redrawn, you know, about 8-9 years ago. Former Alderman Dick Mell was part of the sort of back and forth. Groups like the Black Caucus, Hispanic Caucus, everyone kind of wrestling to get what they wanted out of that. Describe what that process was like.
I mean, the process, I think it's not a simple process. I call it more of an art than science, because you are actually trying to satisfy so many different interests. Not only do you have the council that may have an interest, but you also have groups such as MALDEF, the NAACP. All of these interests have to be satisfied in order for a map to be presented.
MALDEF is a Latino group.
Yes, is the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund. So all of these individuals are participating in the process, and then we have citizens that also come in and do a little cartography themselves, because there were cases where people drew things that were different than, and you looked at those suggestions, and in some cases they made sense and they were adopted into the plan. And overall, you still need 40+ individuals in the council to vote on the plan in the last two cycles. We've been able to achieve that, not end up in court, being sued by any civil rights organization. So I think that we've done a great job in trying to make all of that happen. Now, are there going to be some challenges and some slight issues in that? Yes, there are going to be. We've not had a process where everybody was made whole and everybody was happy.
I remember part of that debate also was the powers that be punishing some of the aldermen that they didn't like very much. We'll keep them all nameless right now. Yeah. Alderman Wagisback, what about Mayor Lightfoot's idea to have an independent commission redraw these maps?
Well, actually, there were several of us who were asking for that last time around. If you recall, we were looking at a map that had 35 wards. We were looking at a public commission that should be set up to start the discussion about making sure that we're following all those rules of the Civil Rights Act, or the Voting Rights Act, sorry. And the idea at that point was to bring in some scholars from the different universities around the city. We put them at a table and we started thinking through some of these ideas. I haven't heard exactly what Mayor Lightfoot was talking about, but that was something that we were starting to say, look, let's have some guidelines for how we do this. Because if you really look at what happened, Jason and I were in those back rooms late at night where you had 2 or 3 big monitors, and every time you moved one block over to satisfy one alderman, you were making another alderman angry. That other alderman might have to bite their tongue and say, fine, I'll do that. And it really became this kind of nauseous process.
Alderman Irvin, what about that? Chicago's lost significant population over the last, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 years. Does it need 50 aldermen?
I think we have 50 aldermen. Actually, if you look at the state statute, we're supposed to have 100. And people, sometimes they don't realize that. Back in the early 1900s, we did go to 1 alderman per ward. And in fact,
so it did have 100 aldermen at one point?
Yeah, under the municipal code today, certain communities, for example, Markham, has 2 aldermen per ward. So some communities still adopt that form. We made a change to go away from that. And at the end of the day, people want representation. They want to feel that they can come to their elected official and get the type of representation that they deserve. A lot of the challenges that were talked about earlier, so for example, picking up garbage, doing other services, those have been done by way of a grid now, where ward boundaries do not come into play. But again, we still need to make sure that all of our communities of interest are represented, that our racial minorities are represented. And today we have some of the greatest diversity in the city council than we've ever seen. And now I don't think it's time to change the rules, because now we have more African Americans and Latinos than we've ever had in the council.
But at the same time, Alderman Wagisback, if you're a resident and you live in in Bucktown, you don't know whether you're supposed to go to the 2nd ward office or to the what other ward is your
First,
ward,
32,
32nd, First?
Yeah.
And I mean, is that in the best interest of Chicago residents?
I don't think it. I think there's times when that becomes a problem, and I think what we're looking for is to follow some guidelines in terms of the census tract. We do have that diversity. We want to keep that diversity. Even when we were looking at lowering the number of people on the map to 35 or the council, you have to do it around the time of the census. You don't really want to do it in the middle of your term. But I think Jason's right. When you have a grid system, when you take out some of those old school politics of the way things were run in terms of services, it does help to have grid system. But that can be improved upon, and I think having a public commission that starts to step forward and say, look, let's match it up with the census tract, let's match it up with the police districts, or take some of these politically created bodies and start matching up the lines, I think we'll be much better off.
Alderman Irvin, is your concern that the city might lose African American representation because it's lost African American population?
I mean, we have 18 wards today, and when we complete the process, I expect us to have 18 wards in the process. I mean, the population has shifted throughout not only just Chicago, but throughout the state. So until we do the census, we really don't know what that answer is going to be.
Alderman Wagisback, a commission, who would be on this commission? How would they be picked? What would the process be?
Well, I think you had the American Bar Association put out a document in 1990, again in 2000, talking about the way to do this, the right way to do it, I think. You could have, the way we were looking at it was have scholars from the different universities, from the law schools, some attorneys, but also people that, as Jason mentioned, from MALDEF or some of NAACP, some of the organizations that they have to be part of the process, and I think you could find the right people to put at the table.
Alderman, go ahead.
I was going to say this. The only challenge that I have with that is if individuals inherently do not know communities in Chicago, they do not know the west side of Chicago, they do not know the north side of Chicago, if they don't know the city inherently, that's going to create a problem. So having individuals that may not know Chicago, may not understand our communities, may not understand how things operate, drawing the map and deciding who represents who, I think that's a challenge.
So Alderman Irvin, if Mayor Lightfoot decides to push for an independent commission to redraw the ward maps, will she get pushed back from your colleagues and you?
I'm sure that there will be some pushback on that, because again, we want to make sure that we're not put in a situation where we're going to lose representative wards under any type of redistricting plan. I mean, there are computer programs that can draw nice, pretty squares throughout the city of Chicago. Yeah. However, will they end up with the same number of representatives that we have currently today? Will African American, Latino, Asian, and other populations be diminished under that type of a setup? And again, we know this city, we know our wards, we know the communities, we know where these things lie. In the last 2 maps that we've gone through, we haven't had any challenges from any civil rights organization, and we had enough votes to pass without referendum. So I think that's working out.
Alderman Wagasback, while I have both of you here, I want to ask you about some other items in the news. Two newspaper reporters, or one columnist, one reporter, criticized Mayor Lightfoot for going to New York for fundraisers and meeting with Stephen Colbert and going to L.A. While things were simmering here at home. Do you think she's misstepped by making these trips?
No, I don't think so. I think that happens all the time with a lot of elected officials at that level. As long as I think she stays focused on the day-to-day activities, from public safety, which she has been. She's been holding accountability Mondays for the police department to make sure that they're on top of things after a long weekend. What she might want to do is bring a lot more people to the table. Some of the pastors, some of the community leaders that should be at the table working with the police to really focus on the public safety issues.
And Alderman Irvin, last night we spoke with the person that chairs Supreme Court Justice Ann Burke's selection process. She selected a judge, Cara Smith, to fill a vacancy. You were really upset about that. You thought it should have gone to an African-American judge. And then she said, well, the person that you recommended was not qualified. Should you have found a better candidate?
No, there were 12 people that applied. So does that mean to say that there were no other African-Americans that applied that were qualified? I mean, at the end of the day, I think that the judge has some serious thinking to do on the process. We don't know who's on the committee. We don't know how many people. We don't know who applied. We know 12 people applied based on what they stated. But you mean to tell me that there was no other qualified African-American in the pool of 12 people to appoint to that spot? I do not believe
So
that.
the person you supported, Ms. Reeves Harris, you would have been happy if it wasn't her, but if it was some other another African-American?
I would have no qualms about someone from our community that was an African-American representing the 7th Sub-Circuit whatsoever.
All right, Alderman Jason Irvin, Alderman Scott Wagasback, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you as always for being here.
Thanks for having us.
And there's more Chicago Tonight just ahead, so please stay with us.
This evening's presentation of Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by ComEd, powering lives.
We have a tremendous source of untapped, efficient energy right here in our school.
Let her rip, Jenny.
I kind of love this idea.
The ComEd Energy Efficiency Program has real ideas for making schools energy efficient.
Pedal faster.
Still to come on Chicago Tonight, a new Showtime documentary digs into the question of whether there was a police cover-up following the Laquan McDonald murder. The story behind a new urban garden and why it features Native American structures like a teepee on Chicago's north side. As Illinois prepares to expand gambling to every corner of the state, what to do about gambling addiction. And a cancer diagnosis leads a man to donate 400 rare and valuable books to the University of Chicago. But first, closing arguments are expected this week in the trial of a man accused of kidnapping and murdering Chinese scholar and University of Illinois student Yingying Zhang. Last week, defense attorneys for Brent Christensen made the unexpected move of admitting their client did in fact kill Zhang. Prosecutors have since brought more evidence against Christensen. WTTW News reporter Matt Masterson has been following this story and has the very latest. Matt, first give us a brief recap of this case.
So Christensen is charged in federal court with kidnapping resulting in death for Yingying Zhang. She was kidnapped in 2017 in the Champaign-Urbana area. She was last seen alive getting into Christensen's car, and she has not been seen since.
It's a death penalty case. Where does it stand as of today?
So prosecutors have been calling witnesses for almost a week now. Last Wednesday was opening statements. They're wrapping up their case shortly. They've called several witnesses from the FBI. They've already played Christensen's recorded confession that he made to his then girlfriend to jurors, and they've found DNA in Christensen's apartment that they've already started presenting to jurors as well.
And as we mentioned at the top, the defense has said, yes, indeed, Mr. Christensen killed Ms. Zhang. So what is the strategy of the defense?
Well, since they've already admitted guilt, they're not putting on much of a defense at this point. They're only calling a couple witnesses. The admission obviously came as a surprise last week, but it was done so in a sense to try to build some sort of sympathy from this jury. The jury, assuming he is convicted, will be the same people deciding whether or not Christensen gets the death penalty or a life sentence.
It's trying to build sympathy, although the prosecution has put forth some very damning evidence. Tell us about some of that evidence.
So Christensen he was recorded confessing to his then girlfriend. Her name is Tara Bullis, and she will be taking the witness stand tomorrow. That confession has already been played to jurors last week, but she's expected to be a key witness for this case as well.
This is Mr. Christensen's girlfriend.
Yes, but he was also in an open relationship at the time, so he had a wife and a girlfriend. The wife is actually one of the 2 witnesses who is expected to be called for the defense later this week.
And what do you expect from their testimony?
Bullis is going to testify about the recording that she made. She was cooperating with FBI investigators at the time. They were actually both at a memorial vigil for Ying Zhang when this confession was made. They were seen on media reports walking together at that time. His wife, she is expected to testify a little bit, certainly about his character, but also about the search that the FBI conducted at their apartment as well.
Any idea when closing arguments and deliberations will happen?
So the prosecution will likely wrap up their case either tomorrow or Thursday, probably Thursday. The defense will call its handful of witnesses, and then on Friday, closing arguments are scheduled, and that will be quickly followed by jury deliberations.
Do you have any insight into who those witnesses will be and what kind of evidence that they'll put forth to try and build sympathy for him?
For the defense, it's going to be his wife, and they're going to recall an FBI agent who was the handler for Christensen's girlfriend at the time. They're, again, not going to be presenting too much at this point. A lot of that could come at sentencing.
All right, Matt Masterson, we will continue to follow your updates on our website on this. And up next, a new documentary draws multiple perspectives on the murder of teenager Laquan McDonald.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight podcast and subscribe.
A new Showtime documentary takes a close look at the October 2014 shooting death of 17-year-old Laquan McDonald by former Chicago police officer Jason Van Dyke. It also looks at the societal and political fires. Named after the number of bullets fired into McDonald's body, the film 16 Shots features interviews with former police officials, the story to light. And joining us is the director and writer of 16 Shots, Rick Rowley, who also directed the film Dirty Wars, which was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature in 2013. Rick Rowley, welcome to Chicago Tonight.
Great to be here.
So, how did you become interested in this subject for a feature-length documentary?
Well, I was in Chicago filming on another project, and I met Jamie Calvin soon after the video had been released, and he, wrote the first articles about this. And when he unspooled for me everything that had been revealed in the city, it was clear that this was an exceptional story, an exceptional case. I mean, right now we're at a moment of national reckoning around race and justice, but this case cuts to the heart of that in a way that almost nothing else does. We know more about this case than is known about any other police shooting in history. And
you in the film interview a lot of the central figures in this, some people who have been loath to talk about this. Was it difficult to get those interviews?
Actually, I was surprised at how open and willing people were to engage on this. And it was, I feel, incredibly lucky. We talked to people on all sides of the story, and we kind of presented honestly our intention, which was, we don't want to reduce either side into a caricature. We actually are really trying to understand how these institutions and these groups sort of function inside.
In the interview that opens the film is the former FOP spokesperson, Pat Camden, who on the scene that night gave the initial narrative, false narrative that we learned about what happened. Tell us about that interview with him.
Yeah, in many ways, this story is a story about a battle between narratives. From the moment that Laquan McDonald was shot to the verdict itself, there's a set of facts that people have, but then a debate over the stories. And it's Pat Camden's job to frame the narrative from the very beginning, and he's very upfront about that. He says in the interview, the police have to be the first to come out with a story before anyone else has a chance to, so that they can control the narrative. And Pat Camden has been the spokesman at 500 police-involved shootings in his career, and you see clips of them in an archival section where he tells the same story over and over and over again.
And he gets kind of annoyed with the interviewer when they bring that up to him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he has. It almost seems like a script unfolds. But not just with him. It's a script that is picked up and replicated in the media, and it becomes just a part of the sort of discourse.
All right, well, let's take a look at another clip. Here is one featuring former Chicago Police Superintendent Gary McCarthy and also Laquan McDonald's great uncle, the Reverend Marvin Hunter.
The enduring mysteries of this case. There are 30 to 60 police shootings a year in Chicago. That's a shooting every week or every other week. Thousands of shootings over the course of my life, and how many of those names do we know? So it was a a whole host of people stepping forward and kind of breaking through this sort of wall of silence that's built around this case. Whistleblowers, civilian witnesses who describe in the film being threatened by police to change their testimony, who refused to be cowed and came forward and spoke with us on camera. There's the activists who sued to force the video to be released when everyone else had given up. There's a sustained pressure and attention that lasted 4 years.
You bring up those civilian witnesses, and they talk about, very candidly, when they were being interviewed by detectives, they say the detectives urged them to lie about the case. Tell us about those interviews.
Yeah, Alma Benitez in particular, she was on scene in front of the Burger King where the shooting happened. She saw the whole thing. And she describes in detail, she was brought back to police headquarters, questioned for hours, all night long, till 3 o'clock in the morning. They kept badgering her, telling her to change her testimony, telling her she didn't hear how many shots she heard. They even brought up the video. They said, we have video, and the video contradicts your statement. Alma was
completely lying about it.
Lying about it completely. The video, in fact, corroborated her statement. And then and told her it's not good to lie, and she was being questioned because she might end up going to jail for perjury.
You also interview our own contributor, Carol Marine, in this story, especially her story about how police went into the Burger King and scrubbed about, what was it, about 2 hours plus of video. Did that ever get resolved, what happened there?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the, there were a lot of amazing journalists in Chicago who really blazed the trail here, and which is why we know more about this shooting than is known about any of the other police shootings in history, really. So yeah, Carol Marine, one of her big kind of revelations was that 87 minutes were erased from the surveillance cameras inside the Burger King.
Okay, so about an hour and a half.
About an hour and a half. Yeah, that cover the time that the shooting happened. And so we actually called up the engineers who install and design these systems, and they say that isn't a thing that can possibly happen. Not only were the original copies erased, but there are redundant backups that are there. Someone went in and took them out.
To a T, everyone on all sides of this case in this film say they believe Mayor Rahm Emanuel covered this video or hid this video of the shooting until after he was reelected. Do you believe it was a cover-up on his part?
I mean, there's no question that it was a cover-up. I mean, there are still questions that remain. I mean, the mayor now says that he didn't see the video until after it was released publicly. I mean, whether he's actually lying about when he saw it, or whether he's just being deeply dishonest by pretending like he didn't know how severe this case is, I mean, that's the only question here. I mean, we know that his team had the video. He had the video. His team had seen it. They were exchanging emails about it. They were worried and concerned about it. And the Corporation Counsel was sent out to pay a $5 million settlement before there was even a lawsuit.
You mentioned to me before we went on the air, she called you up and wanted another interview with you after she left office. Tell us about what she said about Rahm Emanuel in that interview.
Yeah, it's one of the great things about following this story for over 3 years is that we got to interview people at multiple points in their arc here. So the first time we interview Anita Alvarez, she is the sitting state's attorney explaining what's going on. After she's ousted from power, her press spokesman got in touch with us and said she might be willing to speak more openly. So she says she's certain the mayor saw the video beforehand. I mean, I don't want to pretend like Rahm Emanuel is the bad guy in this, is the evil person at the center of this whole sort of thing.
But she also says she believes that Emanuel politically was going to try and blame her for the whole thing.
Yeah. She also, I mean, everyone sees themselves as a fall guy in this. Like, Gary McCarthy was fired immediately afterwards, and he claims, he was a fall guy, taking the fall for this whole thing. Anita Alvarez, the political establishment in Chicago didn't back her up, and she lost her re-election bid and sees herself being thrown under the bus.
And Emanuel isn't interviewed in this film. Did you try to get interviewed with him?
Oh, we tried constantly. We spent it feels like we spent a year sitting in his press person's office trying to convince him that it was good to go on camera. But I mean, that kind of lack of transparency, to just refuse to address at all the most pressing story in your city at the time, it was really shocking to us, actually.
What's the takeaway for the nation?
I mean, these issues around race and criminal justice are not just unfolding in Chicago. Every major city in America is in the middle of this kind of reckoning. But what this case, because of the work of Chicago journalists and the sustained community of attention that has brought transparency to this case, it allows us to see step by step by step how this kind of system works that makes these cases disappear. And that system is at work everywhere. So it allows us to see that, and then also this is an unprecedented moment on so many levels. It's the first time in the 180-year history of the Chicago Police Department that an officer has been charged with murdering a black citizen, and they were convicted. As Will Calloway says in the end of the film, they were convicted by a mostly white jury in front of the entire nation. It is an unprecedented moment, and a moment that, in a process that everyone should learn from.
It certainly upended the police accountability system in Chicago and the entire politics of Chicago. Rick Rowley, congratulations on the film, and thank you for being here.
Thanks so much.
And we're back with more right after this. Many of you might know the name Chicago comes from a word spoken by American Indian tribes. I believe it's a French sort of translation of the phrase stinky onions or something like that. The city is also home to the largest population of Native Americans in the Midwest. Despite this fact, members with Chicago's American Indian community say stereotypes place them in the past instead of in the present. But a new garden aims to challenge that stereotype. We recently stopped by for a visit. Amidst the traffic and noise in Chicago's North Side Albany Park neighborhood, there's a new urban garden. But it's more than just a garden for some residents.
It's became a beacon for Native people who are looking for healing. It's important to have this space here within the city of Chicago because a lot of people have lost their connection to the land.
The garden sits on the corner of Pulaski Road and Wilson Avenue and was created by the American Indian Center and the Chi Nations Youth Council in partnership with the city. Its purpose is twofold: to serve as a healing space for Chicago's Native community and as a teaching and learning hub for non-Native people.
We want everybody in Chicago to be able to come to this garden and learn about Native people, and not just Native people, but the land that is Chicago.
The garden was officially established in November 2018 through a ceremonial land acknowledgement. That's an expression of gratitude used by many tribal communities, and it recognizes Native people as traditional stewards over a plot of land. The ceremony for the First Nations garden came on the heels of the City Council passing a resolution brought forward by Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa, whose ward is home to the garden. The resolution was drafted to recognize Chicago as an indigenous landscape. It calls for acknowledging that the city sits on the ancestral homeland of dozens of tribes, and that the city is currently home to more than 75,000 American Indians, known as urban Indians.
Oftentimes when we think about the history of the United States, we tell ourselves a story of either a land that was devoid of habitation or a land that was cleared for habitation as settlers and Europeans colonized the land. But the reality is that Native people have been in the Chicagoland area for thousands of years, and they continue to be here with a vibrant culture.
Different elements of the garden represent that culture, taken from traditions and customs of more than 100 tribes in the city. Organizers say the recently planted sunflowers help rid the soil of toxins that come from urban settings. A fire pit serves as a gathering space for the community. And traditional Native structures like the wigwam and teepee host Native activities and storytelling all year long.
So many times we are forgotten, we are left out of history, and we're just glossed over. And so having an actual physical space to build things like a longhouse, to build a garden, to grow our traditional plants helps reduce that element of invisibility and helps bring more light and more education to the Native people that call this city home, as well as our important issues that we're facing as a group within the city.
Some of those issues are detailed in a new report out of the University of Illinois at Chicago's Institute for Research on Race and Public Policy. It finds that half of Chicago's Native Americans are rent-burdened. The wage increase associated with a college degree is lower for Native Americans than for all other race groups in Chicago. And women's rates of incarceration in Illinois are higher for Native Americans than for women in all other racial and ethnic groups.
A primary purpose is also just to shed light on the fact that there is a Native community here in Chicago, and to bring attention to some of the challenges that the community faces.
But in addition to recognizing those struggles, Walden says it's important to remember what Native people bring to the table, and she says the First Nations Garden is a prime example of just that.
This is a really great example of youth in the community reclaiming a space of land and indigenizing it. Even just to drive by and see traditional structures in that space in a city is pretty unique.
Organizers with the garden say they hope to replace the soil and eventually plant some more. For those interested in getting involved with the First Nations Garden, there are community work days every Sunday, rain or shine. You can find more details about that on our website. And up next, the potential impact of gaming expansion on gambling addicts in a conversation that we recorded earlier.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/daily briefing and sign up.
Get ready for more casinos, more slots, and legalized betting on sports. As Illinois prepares to expand gambling in every corner of the state, including slot machines at O'Hare and Midway, supporters tout the generation of much-needed revenue to help plug a massive budget deficit. But at what cost? Joining us now to talk about the potential dark side of gambling, namely gambling addiction, is Elizabeth Thielen, president of the Illinois Council on Problem Gambling. Thielen is also senior director at the NICASA Behavioral Health Services, which provides addiction treatment services, including treatment for gambling addiction. Welcome back to Chicago Tonight.
Thank you.
First of all, Elizabeth Thielen, what is the difference between someone who gambles with some sort of frequency and someone who is a gambling addict?
Okay, so somebody who has a gambling problem may have difficulty stepping away. So if they lose, instead of leaving and going home and not really thinking about it for a while, they may come back later that day or another day and try to win back their losses. They may increase their bets in order to get the same excitement level. They may lie about the extent of their gambling to family members or friends. They can have job problems or relationship problems due to their gambling. There are often times where they gamble to escape personal problems. They can have a lot of financial problems and have to get help from family members or friends in order to bail themselves out of those financial problems. So those are just some of the signs that you can
Similar
look for.
warning signs to substance abuse, alcohol abuse. Why is it then that some people can gamble a lot for fun and not have a problem and others just can't?
There are a lot of factors that can contribute to somebody having a higher risk of developing a gambling problem. As you said, some people can drink responsibly and some people can't. Some people can gamble responsibly and some people can't. A lot of it has to do with your family history. There's a high correlation of alcoholism in family members of problem gamblers, so that we know that there's a hereditary component there. People who have a co-occurring substance use disorder or a mental health condition are at increased risk of developing a gambling problem.
And so tell us about the physiology about this. What is going on in the brain of a gambling addict?
Right, so the brain can be very stimulated by gambling. It can almost mimic whether it's cocaine or opiates. There's just a reward response when gambling for some people that is more accelerated in a gambler who has the potential for a gambling problem versus a responsible gambler.
And so what are the best treatment approaches for this problem?
Well, a treatment program that includes the family, really crucial. The family involvement is really important because control of the finances and monitoring of the finances can be very helpful. We know that people use money to gamble, and so if someone who is a trusted family member can keep control of the finances, and that can be really helpful for the gambler to stop gambling. Individual and group counseling, involvement, and 12-step support like Gamblers Anonymous would be really helpful.
And one of the last resorts I read about here is self-exclusion. Tell us about that.
Self-exclusion can be a really helpful option for somebody's recovery program. We have many clients who have self-excluded from casino gambling, and it's an agreement that they enter into that says, I'm a problem gambler, I cannot gamble responsibly, please help me. I want to stay off your property, and if you find me there, I want you to take all my winnings and I want you to arrest me. And it has teeth, it really works. And so the problem comes in when there is other forms of gambling that don't have self-exclusion.
So Illinois casinos do have self-exclusion.
That's correct, yes.
And people have put themselves on this list and been arrested.
Correct.
So is there a predisposition to getting addicted to a certain kind kind of gambling over another? Let's say slot machines versus horse racing.
Right. Well, the type of gambling that somebody engages in can be linked somewhat to gender or personality. So men or action gamblers tend to play cards and do sports betting and racetrack, and women who can sometimes be what we call escape gamblers can gravitate towards more of the slot machines. But in general, people tend to gravitate towards a certain kind, and unfortunately, if there's a gambling problem that is developed and they quit one kind, there's the possibility of transferring to another form of gambling. So in general, if you're trying to recover from problem gambling, staying away from all forms of gambling is the safest option.
Given the massive expansion of gambling that we talked about at the top here in Illinois, do you anticipate a proportional rise in gambling addiction problems?
That is what is seen when there is any sort of large-scale expansion. There is an uptick in problem gambling. That's just kind of to be expected. And so it would be really important to engage in some large-scale prevention measures and public awareness campaigns to do whatever we can to mitigate that from happening.
And from what you understand about the recently passed gaming bill, does it provide enough funding and support for those kinds of efforts?
Well, it's really important, and it's very admirable that the lawmakers did decide to allocate funding specifically for gambling treatment. And so the hope would be that that is used in a way that's flexible, that allows for prevention, that allows for early intervention, for research to determine where are the gaps in services, where are the needs, and allow that funding can be adjusted as needed to meet the needs of the community.
You know, if all of this expansion comes to fruition, do you anticipate a larger societal cost to this?
Yeah, there has been a lot of research that shows that there are social costs that do also equate to monetary costs of problem gambling. And so there's a saying that I think is really important, which is in order to maximize the benefits of sports betting, you have to minimize problem gambling.
And so last question for you, tell us where there are resources for folks that might think they have a problem.
Well, there are state contracted agencies that can provide low cost and free treatment. There's also Gamblers Anonymous, and all of these resources can be accessed. There's a statewide helpline, 1-800-GAMBLER. They also have a website, weknowthefeeling.org, that is accessible by text by texting ILGAMB to 53342, and there's also a live chat option on the website weknowthefeeling.org.
And do you find that individuals have a hard time admitting this to themselves, and it's usually families or friends that have to step in and do it?
Absolutely. There is not wide-scale understanding of gambling disorder that it even exists, and so the gambler themselves don't realize that this is happening. They just think, I need to play more, I'm not doing this right, I have to play longer, I have to invest more in this, and it's often the family members that are seeing it from the outside. They're experiencing the financial devastation and the relationship problems that are more likely to notice the signs and hopefully reach out for help.
All right, Elizabeth Thielen, good tips. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And there's more Chicago Tonight ahead, so please stay with us. Most of us want to leave some kind of mark, to have an impact. This next story is about a man who, in recent years, found a new passion and expertise and is now offering it to the world. Jay Shefsky recently brought us this story. Here's another look.
There are actually certain advantages to knowing that you have a limited lifespan left. When you're told, well, it's going to be measured in months rather than years. And it gives you an opportunity to make arrangements for things like the collection.
Bob Connors began collecting rare books about 5 years ago. He acquired some 400 volumes, many from the earliest days of books.
Let's start with this one, okay?
And then, just 6 months ago, Bob learned he had incurable pancreatic cancer.
This book is my favorite book. It's the oldest book.
This edition of St. Augustine's Confessions was printed in 1475, only about 20 years after the Gutenberg Bible.
But there's also these illuminations. After it was printed, they came back in and added these.
Soon after he learned he had cancer, Bob decided to offer the collection to the University of Chicago because he credits the university with inspiring his collecting.
when I retired, I told myself I was going to do two things. I was going to travel and study.
That was 10 years ago when Bob was 60. The travel took Bob and his wife and daughters around the world. He studied in what the University of Chicago calls its basic program, in-depth classes in the great books of Western civilization. And as Bob dove into the ideas, he became especially fascinated by the books themselves.
Books are an opening to an intellectual and magical world. All these great stories and great ideas are embodied in these books.
Bob bought rare editions of the books he was studying in the basic program. He started with the Victorian-era writer Thomas Hardy and collected nearly all of Hardy's works. As his studies moved back in time, it was the oldest books that captivated him because of the way they made knowledge more accessible.
Before that, you had to be in a monastery or in a library and to get access to these texts. And I think there's a strong argument that these physical books were part of what ended the Middle Ages and ushered in the modern world. And so these are culturally important items, is what I'm trying to say. And that's why I'm so happy that they found a really good home.
Elizabeth Frangel is the curator of rare books at the University of Chicago Library.
This collection is very remarkable for its collection of books that represent the history of early printing. And we call those incunabula, and it comes from the Latin word meaning from the cradle.
Incunabula are books printed before 1501.
His collection includes 12 incunable titles, and that increased our holdings here at the University of Chicago Library significantly.
Incunabula are so prized by scholars that every book is tracked in an online database. When Bob first met with Elizabeth, he mistakenly thought he'd have to convince her of his collection's scholarly value. He brought with him his favorite incunabulum, St. Augustine's Confessions. But first, he checked the database.
I said, I've checked, you don't have a copy of it. These other people have copies of it. You need to have a copy of this. And she agreed.
The collection has been appraised at nearly $500,000. But Elizabeth Frangel says it takes much more than money to assemble this significant a collection in just 5 years. Bob has become extremely knowledgeable about book history.
Another value of these old books, by the way. Okay, notice these little scribblings in the margins.
What are those?
Scribblings, but they're scribblings.
You mean by readers?
Yes, but scholars will come in just to read the marginalia.
Mm-hmm.
They want to know how scholars back then interpreted these books.
Didn't they know they were defacing a rare book?
Well,
one or two books that you want to show us that you're particularly excited about?
Gosh, that's difficult because there are so many.
Elizabeth says Bob's collection is also notable for having so many of what are sometimes called the first pocketbooks, especially ones made by the Aldine and Elsevier printing houses. Despite the monetary value of the collection, Bob says he preferred to donate it as a whole rather than sell it off in pieces.
I mean, one of the things, again, about knowing you have a limited time left, one of the other things you have to think about is legacy. What mark have I left in the world? What will live beyond me? And in this collection, this is a very important part of my legacy that I'm very proud of, frankly. These books, which have survived, in some cases, 500 years, they'll be around for another 500 years. And scholars will still want to come in and look at the actual books.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Jay Shefsky.
We first aired this segment in early May. Today we spoke with Bob Connors and we're pleased to hear that his health has been stable enough that he could attend his daughter's wedding earlier this month. And he's continued collecting rare books, buying several more and donating them to the University of Chicago. And that is our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. A historically wet spring left many Illinois farms underwater. We look at the difficulties farmers are facing and the likely impact on consumers. And the dazzling train that changed locomotive history in our Ask Jeffrey segment. Now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. I thank you for watching. See you tomorrow.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, serving Chicago as a personal injury law firm since 1984.